What happens when humanity builds the most powerful rocket in history, only to watch it crash again and again? Sounds like failure, right? But what if I told you, it's actually part of the plan? Yes, we are witnessing one of the boldest engineering experiments of our time. A towering beast called Starship, born from Elon Musk's relentless ambition, is roaring into the skies and tumbling back in flames. And believe it or not, SpaceX is celebrating. What? Because behind the fire and destruction lies a mission that could one day take humans to Mars. This isn't about perfection. It's about pushing boundaries, collecting data, and redefining space travel. So, what's really going on with SpaceX Starship Flight 9? Let's break it all down. Right now we're in a strange moment. On one side we have this towering, cutting-edge piece of technology, the Starship, easily the largest and most advanced rocket system humanity has ever constructed. It has launched from the American coastline not once, not twice, but 8 times, breaking records and turning heads across the globe. Every launch is a thunderous display of power, with 33 roaring Raptor engines lighting up the sky and lifting this metallic giant far into the upper atmosphere. It's an awe-inspiring sight, a glimpse of the future. But on the other side of this historic achievement lies a very different story, one of repeated failure. For the 3rd flight in a row, this massive spacecraft has failed mid-mission. It soars up but then falls back, breaking apart and burning up in Earth's atmosphere. A beautiful disaster. Now, to be fair, Flight 9 did go farther than ever before. There was real progress made. But there's still a lot to analyze. This wasn't just another test. It was a mission with 2 bold objectives, both critical for Starship's evolution. The first goal? To refly a Super Heavy booster. For the first time in history, SpaceX launched a Super Heavy booster that had already been used. The rocket that lifted off in this latest mission was the exact same one that had flown back in January 2025. After its last flight, it was caught by the iconic Mechazilla Tower, a mechanical arm structure that looks like something out of a sci-fi film. The booster was then brought back to Starbase, SpaceX's coastal launch facility in Texas, and taken to the maintenance bay. There, 4 of its Raptor engines were swapped out, and the rest of the booster was thoroughly inspected and cleaned. Then, back it went to the launch pad ready to fly once more. Now here's the part that makes this even cooler. Among all those 33 Raptor engines, there was one Raptor 314 the PI engine, that was making its 3rd trip to space. That's right. A single engine flown 3 times into the cosmos. This is no longer about just launching rockets. This is about making reusable space vehicles a reality, hardware that can fly again and again just like airplanes. And that changes everything. But flying the same rocket again isn't just about pressing a button. SpaceX wasn't aiming for a safe, soft landing this time. They actually designed the return to be more aggressive, to push the limits of the booster's design. This meant increasing the angle of attack during descent. In simpler terms, imagine the rocket falling straight down. That's a low angle of attack. But tilt it sideways as it comes down, and suddenly more surface area is exposed to the air, increasing drag. And drag is good in this case. More drag means the rocket slows down faster, needing less engine power to make a safe landing burn. But there's a trade-off. A steeper angle means more stress on the rocket's structure, more heat, and more chance of damage. That's why SpaceX didn't aim to land this booster back on the tower. They planned a water landing, allowing them to test the limits without risking valuable infrastructure. If the rocket failed, and they expected it might, it would at least fail while testing something new and useful. This wasn't about avoiding failure. This was about learning from it. Meanwhile, there was a second major test happening in the upper stage, the actual Starship. SpaceX wanted to try a controlled re-entry. They had done this before, but only with Starship V1, the earlier version of the vehicle. This mission used Starship V2, a newer, heavily upgraded design. And most of those upgrades were specifically aimed at making re-entry and landing more successful. They improved the structure, redesigned the tiles, and changed how heat is managed during the fiery plunge back to Earth. The goal is to one day fully reuse the Starship just like the booster. But there's a problem. So far, V2 has never survived re-entry. Every time they try, it ends in failure. Which means we still have very little real-world data on how V2 actually performs during those extreme heat and pressure conditions. Elon Musk himself has said this mission was all about the heat shield tiles. In interviews before the flight, he told Eric Berger of Ars Technica and Tim Dodd from Everyday Astronaut that testing these tiles was the top priority. He even called this flight the Tiles mission. According to Elon, the most important thing is data on how to improve the tile design during the high heating re-entry phase. We've got a dozen or more tile experiments on this flight. That shows you exactly what they were aiming for. So, how did the launch itself go? Surprisingly smooth. We've seen it before, but it never gets old. All 33 Raptor engines ignited without issue. The behemoth thundered off the pad with flawless power. Even with a reused booster, the launch was nearly perfect. No problems. No delays. Just clean raw lift. Now here's something new. During hot stage separation, the moment when the booster detaches and the upper stage ignites its own engines, SpaceX made a small but meaningful change. Normally, the hot stage ring has vent holes all around it. These holes allow exhaust gases from the upper stage engines to escape in all directions, which lets the booster flip whichever way it wants. It's been pretty random in past flights, sometimes flipping left, right, even down. But this time, SpaceX blocked off specific vent holes to intentionally direct the exhaust in a controlled way. The goal? To flip the booster straight up and back instead of letting it tumble randomly. Why? Because that's the most efficient path for the return burn. It requires the least amount of steering and energy, allowing the booster to position itself quickly and smoothly for re-entry. And it worked beautifully. After separation, the booster rotated in exactly the direction they wanted. Then it fired all 13 inner Raptor engines for the boost back burn, again without issue. They shut down cleanly after the burn. No explosions. No fireballs. Just precision. At the same time, all eyes were on the upper stage, Starship itself. Would this finally be the mission where V2 survives re-entry? In previous tests, flames erupted in the engine bay mid-flight, ending the mission early. Those failures crushed the team's hopes. But this time it looked like things were going to be different. Only they weren't. In a surprising twist, it wasn't the upper stage that failed, it was the booster that suffered a fatal issue. After a near-perfect flight, the booster re-entered the atmosphere at the high angle of attack just as planned. At first, everything looked normal. Fire built up around the base as usual. No signs of major damage. Then suddenly, it failed. Something went wrong. A bright flash, followed by silence. The booster disintegrated in the air and fell into the ocean, lost once again. And then fly again. That's the core of the SpaceX philosophy, rapid iteration and learning through real-world experience. Each flight may not be perfect, but every one is a step closer to making Starship reliable enough for its ultimate goals. Crewed missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. This flight might have ended in a fireball, but compared to the previous ones, it flew longer, got further, and tested more systems than ever before. So despite the dramatic ending, it was still a huge win in terms of data and development progress. What's also worth noting is how the community has reacted. Despite the explosive failure, a lot of aerospace professionals and fans alike are praising the transparency and ambition behind these tests. You don't learn to build the world's most powerful rocket by being cautious. You do it by pushing boundaries, testing hardware to destruction, and learning from every screw-up along the way. This has always been Elon Musk's approach, and while it's unconventional in the space industry, it's also what's allowed SpaceX to leapfrog long-established players in such a short time. And Starship isn't just another rocket. It's meant to be fully reusable, capable of launching over 100 tons to orbit, and it will eventually carry humans to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis program. That means each test like this isn't just about making flashy headlines, it's a critical step toward building a transportation system that could change humanity's future in space. If even half of what SpaceX envisions becomes reality, it will lower launch costs dramatically and make space more accessible than ever before. Looking ahead, the failures from this flight will likely lead to design tweaks. Better seals on the tanks, more robust control software, maybe even improved camera angles so we can get clearer views of what's happening in those engine bays and payload compartments. SpaceX learns fast and adapts even faster. That's why they're not too broken up over this failure, it's all part of the process. The hardware might be gone, but the experience gained is invaluable. And if you're wondering whether this hurts their chances with NASA or other partners, not really. NASA is well aware that this is an experimental system still in early development. In fact, they expect failures at this stage. It's one reason why Artemis missions that rely on Starship are still a few years out. The timeline always included room for explosive setbacks like this. So now we wait for the next flight. Starship 5, 6, and 7 are waiting in the wings with upgrades based on what went wrong here. Each one will be slightly better, slightly more refined. It's a race against time, sure, but it's also a test of willpower and engineering grit. And if SpaceX stays on course, they may just pull off one of the greatest technological achievements in human history. That's it for this breakdown. Whether you're cheering for SpaceX, skeptical of their methods, or just here for the rocket explosions, one thing's for sure. Watching Starship evolve is one hell of a ride. Stay tuned for the next test flight. It's coming sooner than you think. When the landing burn began, it initially looked promising. About 12 out of the 13 Raptor engines appeared to come back online, suggesting the system was at least attempting a controlled descent. But just seconds after this apparent engine restart, the entire Super Heavy booster erupted into a massive fireball. The visuals weren't the clearest. SpaceX's camera coverage at that exact moment left a lot to be desired, but the amount of fire was undeniable. Flames burst out in every direction, painting the sky with intense orange and red. It was immediately clear that this booster wasn't coming back in one piece. This particular booster wasn't just a repeat of the last. It was a sort of version 1.5 version, an upgraded but still intermediate test model that differed both from the very first booster and the one flown before it. It was clear SpaceX was still iterating on booster design. And looking at what happened, it's a good thing they weren't planning to catch this one with the tower arms. That level of risk simply wouldn't have made sense at this development stage. Still, the explosion tells us this version of Super Heavy is not ready for reuse just yet. Meanwhile, as the booster was reduced to molten scrap, the upper stage, the Starship itself, was powering through its ascent phase. All 6 of its Raptor engines were running smoothly, pushing the spacecraft higher into the upper atmosphere. But as the ascent continued, viewers began to notice something odd happening in the engine bay. There were strange visual artifacts, plumes of gas venting out from above the engines. One particular stream of vapor caught everyone's eye, emerging from the top left section of the camera frame and flowing downward. Naturally, people began to ask, is this a leak or something deliberate? As it turns out, this plume was likely a part of SpaceX's upgraded nitrogen purge system. This system was recently installed to address an issue that occurred during Flight 7, when a fire broke out in the attic section of the ship. The attic is essentially a small compartment sandwiched between the ship's heat shield and its oxygen tank. The new purge system floods this space with non-flammable nitrogen gas, displacing any potentially explosive oxygen or methane before a fire can start. What we were seeing, most likely, was that purge system doing its job in real time. From there, the ship continued along its flight path with apparent success, but things began to look more suspicious around the 8-minute and 30-second mark. Hot spots started appearing. One was clearly visible on the engine bell to the right, glowing orange with heat. On the opposite side of the ship, we saw another faint glow, though the view was partially obstructed. At first glance, it didn't seem catastrophic. Rocket engines get hot, glowing metal isn't unusual. But the unevenness and the lack of clarity created concern. Was this just normal heating, or the early signs of something going wrong deep within the propulsion system? At main engine cutoff, things turned even weirder. As the engines shut down, a huge amount of gas vented from the engine bay. You could see brief flickers of flame, possibly small ignitions happening near the top right of the engine cluster. Then, something subtle but important. The ship began to rotate. It wasn't a violent, out-of-control spin like on previous failed flights, but it was noticeably unstable. The vehicle wasn't holding its attitude as firmly as it had in past missions. And this time the SpaceX broadcast team went quiet. The silence was telling. No confident commentary. Just confusion and hesitation. Watching the footage again later, it became clear that something wasn't right. We made live notes during the event, jotting down thoughts like, seems to be moving a lot. Gas is venting. Is it going backwards? Is the tail section facing up? We weren't sure if this was part of a controlled maneuver or something going wrong behind the scenes. But by the 14-minute mark, things appeared to settle down. The spin reduced and the ship looked relatively stable. At this point, the commentary resumed, and the presenters mentioned the deployment of the test payload. Simulated Starlink satellites, used to test the new PZ dispenser ejection system. Now, for a brief moment, we got an amazing interior camera view from inside the payload bay. Floating in zero gravity, we saw bits of ice, small frozen droplets drifting and spiraling in different directions. It looked surreal, almost artistic. But those ice particles told another story. They were moving erratically, hinting that the ship was still spinning slightly. Even if the spin had slowed, full attitude stability hadn't been regained. Still, there was hope that the payload deployment could go as planned. But what came next was disappointing. Around the 18-minute mark, the door that was supposed to open for payload release got stuck. This was a significant failure. The Starlink simulators, which were designed to be launched using the new mechanism, couldn't be deployed. The mechanism itself may have worked, but if the access door didn't open properly, nothing could exit. It was a frustrating moment, especially given how far the mission had come. And just like that, the ship's cameras cut out. We lost visual for over 10 minutes, with no updates or telemetry. Viewers were left in the dark, literally and figuratively, just hoping the ship was still operating as planned. But by the time visuals returned, it was clear that things had deteriorated. When the camera feed resumed around the 30-minute mark, it was nighttime in that part of the world. The visuals were extremely limited, but we could still see clouds rushing by far beneath the ship. These clouds weren't just slowly drifting, they were moving at high speed, which told us the Starship itself was spinning rapidly. It was obvious now, the vehicle had entered an uncontrollable spin. The presenters finally acknowledged that attitude control had been lost. At this point, there was no saving the ship. Without proper orientation, it would tumble helplessly back into the Earth's atmosphere, where re-entry forces would tear it apart. A post-flight update from SpaceX confirmed our suspicions. They stated that an attitude control error prevented Starship from getting into the intended position for re-entry. Elon Musk also posted an update on X, saying that leaks caused loss of main tank pressure during the coast and re-entry phase. And if you think about what we saw earlier, the venting gases, the strange camera artifacts, the gradual instability, it all adds up. If you have a propellant leak during the coast phase, you're essentially creating uncontrolled thrust. The leaking gas pushes the vehicle off balance, spinning it like a balloon with the nozzle released. Starship does have its own set of cold gas thrusters designed for attitude adjustments, but they're relatively weak. They can fine-tune orientation but weren't made to counteract full-blown propellant leaks. Even worse, Starship's thrusters are not powered by dedicated gas canisters. Instead, they use boil-off gases from the main fuel tanks, specifically from the cryogenic liquid methane and oxygen. As these cryogenic liquids warm up, they naturally produce high-pressure vapor. SpaceX cleverly routes this vapor into the thrusters, essentially getting free attitude control. But if the tanks are leaking, then there's no pressure buildup, and without that, the thrusters just don't work. This theory explains everything. The ship lost its attitude control during the coast phase, likely due to leaks that prevented pressure buildup. Without thruster control, the vehicle began to spin uncontrollably, drifting off course and unable to position itself for re-entry. As the ship approached Earth again around the 41-minute mark, it began to interact with the upper atmosphere. That's when things went completely off the rails. The external heat and air resistance began to act on the tumbling spacecraft. It wasn't a clean re-entry. Fire streaked across the camera view. Bright flashes lit up the sky. Metal surfaces started to glow, warp, and melt. Despite all of this chaos, the onboard Starlink cameras managed to keep broadcasting almost the entire way down. Viewers were treated to a surreal, almost heartbreaking visual, parts of the ship glowing with intense heat, visibly breaking apart in real time. Eventually, the cameras failed, but not before capturing an unforgettable spectacle of destruction. One of the last visual confirmations of Starship's fate came not from SpaceX, but from the skies above Namibia. Someone recorded a massive streak of light, a gigantic shooting star blazing across the night sky. That was Starship, or what was left of it, burning up during its uncontrolled re-entry. Even though this flight ended in a dramatic failure, it wasn't a complete loss. SpaceX learned a lot. Sure, they didn't get all of the data they had hoped for, but what they did gather was invaluable. Each mistake becomes a lesson. Each failure reveals something new about how the vehicle behaves under stress. And most importantly, this failure didn't seem to slow them down. Elon Musk posted shortly afterward that the launch cadence for the next 3 flights will be faster, at approximately 1 every 3 to 4 weeks. That's not slowing down, that's accelerating. That's SpaceX in a nutshell.